And the two things that was sort of our guiding light from the beginning was like, why did they leave Iran? And how did we become so un-Persian?
Hi, Danielle and Galeet. Thank you for joining me on my podcast today.
Oh, thank you so much for having us.
We're excited to be here.
This is the first time I've interviewed sisters together, so I'm interested to see how the conversation goes and how your experience has worked over time together rather than just an individual journey that most of the people I've talked to have experienced. So with that, could one of you tell me well, actually, before that, give us a little bit of an idea of how did you get to be where you are today with your heritage?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because that's what the entire podcast series is about. It's an six-part audio documentary about our family, their life in Iran as Jews in the 1950s and 60s, where they had a wonderful life where people are very surprised by often who don't know people who immigrated from Iran, but in the 50s and 60s it was Jews, it was called the Golden Era, the Golden Age for Jews in Iran. And our grandfather was a famous singer on the radio, and our father was a teenager who was becoming a pop star on TV. And they had an incredible life there, and yet they left Iran. A long time before the Islamic Revolution, like 15 years before the Islamic Revolution, in a time when most other Jews weren't leaving Iran. So we've always wondered, what exactly was going on there and what parts of the story we hadn't been told. And I think that was sort of what kind of pushed us to want to know more.
And so what was it at this point in your lives that you decided to pursue it to learn more?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because Danielle and I are coming to this podcast from really different places. I am a scholar, I'm an anthropologist, and I actually started my graduate work thinking that I was going to go to Iran and write about my grandfather many, many years ago. So, I guess I started this journey a long time ago, but then kind of dropped it because it became clear that I couldn't go to Iran. And this project, in many ways, sort of allowed us to go to Iran in some ways because of some of the material that we found, which you'll hear about if you listen to the podcast. Um, in terms of, why now? I mean, part of it is also that we had more time on our hands. We started this project during COVID, and we both, I wasn't performing, I wasn't, teaching, going places, and Danielle had a lot more time with her work. And I also recorded an album where I sing with my grandfather. In September, I debuted that album. So part of that is also that timing, but part of it is also, I think, just where we are in our lives. Wouldn't you say, Danielle?
Well, I would say that it was for me personally, during COVID, for the first time, I wasn't like totally swamped with work. And so something that we had always kind of like talked about doing, we started, and also Zooming and talking to people all over the world became more of a thing. And so we just started interviewing people, Galit and I, over Zoom during in 2021, really not knowing what we were doing, not knowing if we were making a film or writing a book or making a podcast, just trying to get information at first. And then something interesting happened in 2022. We kind of like put the project a little bit on the back burner as both of our work schedules got really busy again. And then a friend of mine who knew about the project and what we were starting to do sent me something about a fellowship, a grant from a foundation for untold Jewish stories. And it was, a foundation, the Maimonides Fund was funding through this thing called the Jewish Writers Initiative Digital Storytellers Lab, stories that were, interesting stories and that haven't been heard before in the Jewish world. And so I applied for this fellowship, got it. And then actually for me, having the structure of the fellowship, even more than the funding of the fellowship, actually pushed me, gave me deadlines to create a pilot for this series. And then Galeet and I started putting more time into it from that point on, and then started fundraising to get other sponsors on board.
Yeah, a lot of people that I've interviewed, that's when they started getting into their family is during COVID. So I think it's in a one of the side benefits of having more time is a lot of people have been able to really learn the stories of their families and where they came from.
Yeah, that's interesting that that is a common theme. But, also just Zoom enabled
Yeah.
us to interview so many more people and to have these kind of more intimate conversations than we would have, just interviewing people on the phone wouldn't have really given us that same kind of way of connecting in an interview that we were able to have with Zoom. And so that was a big game changer.
Yeah, you mentioned I listened to the first episode of the podcast, and you mentioned you can't go to Iran, and you found some sources within your family. Was the most of how you learned the story of what happened through interviews, or did you use other sources as well?
So I would say that the what we ended up learning, I mean, we're pretty determined and pretty we kept on sort of going talking to the same people, some of the same people again and again, because we would
Mhm.
talk to somebody and they wouldn't go quite far enough, and then we would find something else out from another source, and then we'd go back to that person and say, "Wait, when you said that, um because a lot of the topics that we're talking about are things that people have really become within that culture, used to kind of not sharing. And so there are things that it wasn't like people were purposely telling us the wrong story. It's like over the course of 60 years, when you tell a certain story, we all tend to like tell the same story over and over and over and over. And when a culture kind of reinforces that that is our story, it's kind of hard to get people to open up. So it was a process, and we've been working on it, for the past 3 years. Over the last year, it really sped up because of some tapes that we found. I think you heard about that in episode
Mhm.
1. That actually helped a lot because it added a lot of color to the stories, and we were able to really, like Alit said, visit. It was almost like going back in time and visiting Iran all at once. And so that really kind of broke the door down on a lot of the story, that we end up telling in the series.
And it's a real mix of the different kind of people that we talk to in terms of family members, and scholars that I know in the field, and yeah, a real mix of also just Iranians who we hadn't ever met before, who we learned had these connections with our grandfather. So it was a real exciting exploration and journey for us to kind of, we never knew where we were gonna go from there, but each interview took us to different places that we knew we had to explore.
I think today, in episode 2, which was released today, people are going to hear a really interesting and very surprising interview. It was one of my favorite interviews in the entire series, with a man named Habib Parto, who is a Muslim Iranian man, that was really close with our grandfather, that we never knew him before. And we met him and interviewed him. And his interview is so surprising about, you know, the relationship between Jews and Muslims at the time in Iran, and a lot of other things that were super surprising. It ended up being, and he's not any kind of a scholar or he was just someone that was
No, I mean, it
lived
was kind
through
of
it.
amazing. You know, I met
And it
his
was,
son
yeah.
and I would not have followed up with him. He told me, "Oh, yeah, I know that my father had a really close relationship with your grandfather." And I would have left it at that, but we were doing this project, so I got back in touch with
Mhm.
him and it's kind of amazing what we found out from him.
Yeah, that interview is really one of my favorites. So looking forward for you and everybody to hear that conversation with him.
Do you have a rough idea about how many people you were able to learn from about your family?
I think it was
Wow.
like we ended up interviewing about 85 people
Oh,
on tape. Um, I know that because in my transcripts, it's like it's like how many conversations you've thrown
uh,
into the
Mhm.
transcription service. It's like somewhere in the mid 80s, but
But we had so many, yeah,
we
so
had
many
talked to a
more
lot more than that, actually, that were
casual
just like, yeah,
conversations. Yeah.
people that we had conversations with who told us who to talk to and, gave us background information, but we did about 80 something on tape, which is a lot.
yeah. But that just goes to show like how much somebody can learn about their grandparents or different family members just by following those breadcrumbs that you mentioned, talking to the people who talk to the people and following that along.
Yeah,
Yeah, well,
absolutely.
like another thing that kind of stood out in my mind. So one of the people who gave us some really, really important information, he's also in episode 2 today. Sadly, he passed away since the interview that we did with him. And we didn't actually do the interview. We sent a producer to do the interview with him in LA because he didn't speak English. And we had a producer interview him in Persian. And the information that we got from that interview was priceless. And I don't think there would have been a source to get that information anywhere else. And that man is gone now. And so I feel so grateful that we just pushed forward and did what we did when we did it because you
Yeah, we
know
were a bit like racing against the clock because many of these people are old. And
Yeah.
so
yeah, the
we
people
were,
who remember what happened in the 1950s in Iran are few and far between now. And especially a lot of the key figures that people were like, oh, you should have talked to so and so
Mhm.
or whatever. But this guy, luckily we interviewed him and he died at 90 years old this past year. And we got an interview with him, and it's a really beautiful interview that added a lot to the story.
So how have your different professional backgrounds kind of complemented each other as you were putting this project together?
yeah, it's really been amazing in that sense because, I am both an anthropologist. I do ethnographic interviews for a living, and I've been researching Jews in the Middle East and North Africa for my whole career. And I'm also a musician and have produced albums. So uh being able to kind of use those skills that I've developed and sort of bring that together with Danielle's tremendous, background in areas of expertise as, as a journalist, as a storyteller, as a producer, and many, many more things, which, Danielle can add. I mean, we just together have really been able to bring all of our talents, and it's been really exciting. We've never worked together on a project before.
Yeah, I mean, just building on what Galit said, like in addition to like our actual skills and talents, we have such different skill sets and connections in the world. Galit is very well connected, in the Jewish world. I'm very well connected in the media world. And um, it was just a beautiful kind of merging of our skill sets, our connections, our areas of expertise, my, understanding of distribution and marketing, when it comes to creating a story, a series like this. So yeah, it was very, very, it worked out really, really well. We have a third sister who is a rabbi, and her skill set, she's been super busy because she has a full-time job, but it would have been an interesting thing if we all three could have worked on this together, because we all have very, very different skill sets. But Galit and I filled the pie pretty well, just the two of us.
Yeah, I did see that it has Michelle in the credits for doing the introduction of each
Yeah,
episode. So I saw her
Yeah,
in there.
we squeezed her in. We
yeah,
squeezed her
we let
in.
Michelle be the voice that, introduces everyone. And it's fun because like everyone in the family and all the friends recognize that that's Michelle's voice,
Mm,
who's, introducing the two of us to the world. So
yeah.
yeah, it's nice.
So what themes did you find as you were looking through, as you were completing this project, themes within your family that you found? I know you were definitely music was a strong one that you started from the beginning, but what ones were you either looking for or you found along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I think we allowed the story to develop, and we weren't exactly sure when we started this project what the story was. I mean, we took a lot of time to sort of say, I mean, we knew we had amazing material, but we weren't sure what the story was. But it became very clear as we kept talking to people, what were the issues that were most interesting to us. And those were some of the questions that we had all our lives, about our family's emigration from Iran, and these questions of why they left Iran when they were huge stars. And even though I have such a knowledge um, of Iranian history, it still didn't actually make sense to me, and didn't make sense to us. So we kind of took those questions, and Danielle really, she wrote the script, and she sort of guided she guided the script in terms of what we were most interested in looking at. Each time we talked to people, the story became much more clear.
But I think Galit is right that like we never really were like, this is definitely the story in the beginning. We kind of knew that we wanted to understand the two things that was sort of our guiding light from the beginning was like, why did they leave Iran? And how did we become so un-Persian? Like
Yeah.
how did it all get, and those two questions ended up being a really good ones for guiding our way through. But then there are all kinds of twists and turns and things that we learned. And it's funny because our father the other day said to me, "So why did we leave Iran?"
Yeah, it's such an
He's
amazing.
like, "I want to know. What did you find out?"
Yeah.
And I was like, Dad, you just need to listen to the rest of the story. It's like we haven't actually we're still putting the finishing touches on episodes 5 and 6 now. So episodes 1 through 4 are in the can, and we're putting finishing touches on the last two. But my dad can't wait to hear the end of the story. And I'm
Mm,
like, Dad, you know why you left Iran. But it's very interesting because we've really spent a lot of time thinking about it.
mhm.
And it's something where again, you tell he has told sort of like the same stories over and over for years and hasn't necessarily questioned it. And
But we've been actually really surprised how open our dad has been to us shifting the story that he's been telling
Mm,
us over many years, and being open to kind of seeing it in new ways, which we weren't really sure. But just it's been amazing to see how he's really enjoyed being a part of this journey as well, and has been excited and open to hearing our take on the story.
Yeah, it's like I was really nervous.
We both were.
Like
Ah.
like for him to hear it each episode when it's done, I'm like, okay, mom, dad, are you ready to hear episode 2?
Have they heard 3 yet?
No, no. They
Yeah, we
they
need to send it
actually
to them.
didn't want to hear 3 until the whole world heard 2. So they'll want to hear every day because they were confused. Like their friends were asking them so many questions about each episode, and they were like, didn't want to get too far ahead of them so that it's hilarious because it's
That is
their daily
great.
life. You know
That's
what I
so
mean? And it's like,
amazing.
but they didn't want to know too much about the story. Like it's very, very interesting. My parents and my dad, especially, yeah, I agree with Galit. Like he's been very open and really sort of like changed during the process, changed the way that he sees the past. And he's able to really kind of see more nuance in things than he has ever done. It's just pretty amazing because he's 81 years old. And yeah, it's pretty impressive. So yeah, it's fun though. It's really, I mean, that is the most gratifying thing. I mean, I think seeing my parents' reaction and seeing my kids' reaction to this series has been the most gratifying thing for me because really, I mean, that's why we're doing it, is to remember our family story and to really tell our family story and to understand our family story. I think for us, I'm not quite sure yet. Like you asked like about us, like what the process. I don't know yet. I'm not done. I think the process has I've changed and learned a lot during this process, but I don't think I'm fully I don't think I've fully realized yet the impact of this project on me. I'm still so deep in it.
Yeah,
And
we both are.
um and it's been a really emotional, crazy journey.
Yeah, one of the themes that you kind of pick up in your intro or your outro to the podcast is identity, belonging, and music. So, can you quantify how or put into words how that has affected your identity, your sense of identity of who you are by this project? Or is it still too ambiguous, like you said?
I don't know. I mean, I have been thinking about these issues for a long time, probably
Mhm.
much longer than Danielle has. As somebody who teaches about Persian Jewish culture for many years, I've been thinking about this. And it's really interesting in terms of, I would say probably around 2017, 2018, I started much more talking about the fact that, hey guys, I didn't grow up Persian, even though you see me as this
Mm.
very exteriorly Persian Jew. I didn't really start talking about that until around 2018. And that's that's been exciting to share because still not that many people um understand that piece
Well, it's
about.
funny that because mine is exactly the opposite. And we talked about that a little bit in episode 1, where for her identity crisis is people thinking she's a lot more Persian than she actually is because of what she does. And for me, it's the opposite, where because the storytelling that I've done in my career, which doesn't have to do with Iranian identity or being Jewish, there are tons of people. I predicted this would happen, and it already has happened, where the moment this hit the world, I have a gazillion people reaching out to me being like, "Oh, no, you were Persian." I mean,
Mm.
I don't know. It's funny because I have a Persian last name, but people don't know that in your work world, if maybe it's your married name or why your name is that, or, and it hasn't been a part of what I talk about at work. So it's interesting. I mean, people in our personal life, our family friends all know that our dad is Persian, But I think a lot of the issues that we're talking about, even to our family friends and things, friends of my parents on Facebook and things are writing like, I can't wait to hear this story from your perspective. You know, it's a very interesting thing because yeah, it's like you're friends with people forever, but like, do you really know their story? And like a ton of people that I know, I never knew that they were married. He's married to a Persian woman and her family left Iran, and you know what I like, all
And
kinds of
everybody, so many people have mixed identities. And so it's a story that so many people are relating to, whether or not they're Jewish or Iranian, most people have immigrated from somewhere or have relatives from somewhere that are not, you know, here.
Yeah.
well, it's yeah, it's interesting what people identify with in our story, and that has
Yeah.
been really amazing for us. This past week, we have gotten so many messages, emails, and social media messages, and all kinds of things with people wanting to share their stories with us because they feel sort of seen in our story,
Mhm.
because their family is had immigration kinds of things going on, or family members who live really far away in other parts of the world and communicated in similar ways with tapes. I had several people say, oh my God, I wish I could find the tapes that my family sent back and forth when my uncle immigrated to America from another, from South America or from wherever. But I think a lot of people see their own family story in our story, and it's pretty amazing to see that and to see how it's resonating. And how, yeah, I mean, I think there are parts of our story that even if you aren't from an immigrant family, maybe you felt like an outsider in some other way. Everyone has sort of experienced that at some point in some way, and I think can understand parts of our story from that perspective.
Yeah, I've spent most of my life in rural Western United States, and there's not much diversity out here. There's mostly people who've been in the United States for generations. And so I think when people like you are willing to put their story out there and put their family history, it makes the world smaller. And it's not just Iran as some country clear over there, but let's look at the people and the different generations behind the person that I see across the table from me, and make the world
100%.
a safer place because it's
Absolutely.
real people.
But even if
Absolutely.
it
And
but even if it isn't cultural differences, I think, like people with disabilities or people with, there's all kinds of challenges that people struggle with where they feel not seen or they feel like an outsider in some way
Mhm.
or another. And I think this story will resonate with people even who don't have any kind of like real cultural kind of.
Yeah.
we are hoping that people will understand that the world is also much more complex than, Jews against Muslims. There's such a divide in the world right now, and it's, such a difficult time in the world. And just to remember that it wasn't always like this. And I think people are often really surprised when they understand these stories that just haven't been told very much.
And I
Yeah,
think
I
as
think,
people
yeah,
see these stories instead of just news headlines, then they get the real picture of the world rather than just what's going to sell newspapers type of thing.
100%. And I think, like Galit said, our story, while of course we didn't plan at all, like the timing behind when this story is being told, it's a really great time for people to hear a story like this because it does speak a lot to the similarities between some of the people that are seen on very different sides of issues these days. And it's a very emotional story. I'm excited for you to hear episode 2 today. It's a great story.
Well, thank you so much for putting the time and effort into sharing your family's story and for joining me today here.
Thank you so
Thank
much for having
you.
us.
Yes, and thank you for listening. Thanks
And
to everyone else for listening, and tune in. Please go, and sign up. We have an email newsletter. I don't know if you can include this in the
I
interview,
will, yeah, I'll put it in the show
but
notes.
our, email newsletter is, you can go directly to our webpage. It's nightingaleofiran.com. And at our website, you can sign up for our email newsletter, which is going to be sharing information about our upcoming events and behind the scenes content and bonus content and all of that. So yeah, listen to the podcast and sign up for our newsletter.
Yeah, and I'll have links in the show notes for that to make it easy for everyone. I'm excited to go
Yay!
listen to episode 2.
Woohoo!
Yes, thank you so much. Keep
All right, thanks
listening.
again.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.